Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. And if you're just joining us, we would love to get a response from you in the chat to know where you're joining us from. Where in the world are you joining us from? Oh, Lisa Louise, good to see you. I know she's in Hawaii. Yeah, good to see some familiar faces here. Welcome, everyone. Please share in the chat where you're joining us from. Welcome, welcome. We have Hawaii, a few people from Hawaii. Okay. West Coast Canada, Zurich, New Delhi, North Idaho Mountains, British Columbia, Canada, Chicago, Portland, Oregon, South Africa, Paris, Sofia, Canada, Hong Kong. Wow, late for you. Thank you for joining us. Great. Judith from Italy. Happy birthday, Judith, dear friend. Thank you for joining us on your birthday. A few people from South Africa. Wonderful. And Sweden, of course. Beautiful. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to all of you. Italy, Georgia, US, Portland. Yeah, it's great to see you. And if you're just joining us, please do share in the chat where you're joining us from so we can begin to connect to this global web of people here showing up. Thank you. All right. Welcome, 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 welcome. Yeah, from Germany, New York. Oh, you have quite a few people here, Thomas from Sweden. Okay, welcome everybody. Warm, warm welcome to all of you. It's really wonderful to connect to this global community of like-hearted people here. And if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome to you. And it's so wonderful to see some familiar faces here of old friends. And we're very happy to see all of you. I want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we will share the recording with everyone who registered afterwards. So you'll have access to it for replays or to share with others. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Natasha, and I am here with my partner, Lorenz. We are the co-founders of Sutra.co, which is a learning platform designed for group relational learning experiences. We also lead a program on transformational experience design. And our intention with creating and evolving Sutra is to bring more love and connection into the world. And at the heart of our work is helping creators bring more meaningful connection into the spaces they create online. Today, we're very excited to have and welcome Tomas Björkman into a conversation with Lorenz to explore how we can work towards co-creating a more conscious society together and learning more about the inner development goals. So thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us. We will also have some time to break out into small groups to share and reflect with each other, to share some insights at the end. And we'll have some questions and reflection time as well for the group. So please stay with us till the end. This session will be 90 minutes. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to those of you just joining us. Please share in the chat where you're joining us from. And Lorenz, I'm going to pass it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Natasha. Yes, welcome everybody. And we do like to start our calls with a few moments of stillness. So I invite you to land in the space together with us for a few moments. Take a deep breath. Maybe sit with your back straight if that's comfortable for you to do so. Lower your gaze. I invite you to notice the sounds in your space. And begin to notice the sound of your breath. Notice the feeling of your breath as you inhale. Notice the subtle shifting of your body, fabric on your skin with each breath. And bringing your awareness a little lower, noticing your belly as it expands and contracts, maybe taking a slightly deeper breath to really fill your body. And noticing the point of contact between your body and your chair. Feeling the weight of your body as you inhale and exhale. Noticing where your feet touch the floor, just bringing awareness to the places where your body touches the space around you. And just noticing yourself and your space. Noticing how you're showing up in this moment. How are you feeling? What is your internal, emotional, and mental landscape like? Taking a moment just to welcome anything that might be present for you as you arrive in this space. And taking one more deep breath to settle into whatever might be present for you. I invite you to gently open your eyes, and if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe turn on your camera for a few moments and take a moment to notice the people who are in the space here. We have people from all over the world. Just taking a moment to notice one or two people. Maybe get a sense of how their day is going today. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. I am really excited to be stepping into a conversation with Tomas Björkman, who I only met just recently, a few months ago, but have heard so much about him and have had him come up in so many conversations. So it almost feels like he's the man behind the scenes of so many projects. And I'm excited to unpack some of that. I'll offer a brief intro. Tomas is a social entrepreneur, thinker, writer, and philanthropist, formerly a serial entrepreneur in banking, real estate, media, and IT. He has since shifted his efforts towards catalyzing a human culture of consciousness development that can drive societal change. And that is a little bit of what we'll be exploring today. Tomas, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It will be a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd love to start with your work with Ekskäret Foundation. You started this initiative quite a few years ago, and would love to just start there and have you share a little bit about your vision and how you got there.
Thank you for asking. So I think I'll start from the very beginning. I'm Swedish, come from very humble middle class or even lower middle class background. I was the first in my family on both my father's and my mother's side to have the opportunity to go to university. I studied mathematics and physics at university, a very sort of traditional science, materialistic perspective of the world. And I really liked those subjects and they came fairly easy to me. So my plan was to stay in academia. But for some reasons, the business world was calling me, and I quite suddenly changed from academia into the business world. And as you mentioned, I've started a number of companies, some small and unsuccessful, but at least 3 major ventures in IT and in property and in banking. And it was after I had the opportunity to sell my banking business back in 2006 that I really had an opportunity to think about what to do with the second half of my life. I was about to turn 50 then. And I came to the conclusion that I really wanted to concentrate on trying to understand, study and understand, but also be practically involved in the field between personal inner growth and development and societal change. And that was really the starting point then of my foundation, the Ekskäret Foundation, or the Oak Island Foundation, as we say in English, where we are trying to, and we have our own island outside Stockholm, a retreat center, where we are doing very many things, anything from very practical things like youth camps in the summer and personal development retreats the year around, but also invitational conferences in this area between personal inner growth and development and societal change. And perhaps I should also mention a little bit how I came to this area, which is quite far away from both mathematics and physics and investment banking. But not so far away from the business world as it might seem at first, because I came to this area of inner development from a business perspective, and I'm sure many of you are joining us here this evening in Europe also comes from a business perspective and a leadership development perspective or an organizational development perspective. So I had the opportunity during the years when I was the chairman of a small banking group in Scandinavia to have the privilege to work with some very talented leadership development consultants who showed both me, myself, and my management team how important this lifelong developmental journey that we are all on, how important that is, not just for us as individuals, but also for us in business to be able to function well in a more and more rapidly moving and complex world. So I came from a more instrumental business perspective. But then, of course, I discovered the effect these developmental programs that I participated in had on myself, had on my colleagues, and on our ability to relate to ourselves, to relate to each other, to function better in a business environment, but also, of course, on a personal level, that this helped me very much in my personal life, in my family life. And then I started to ask myself the question, how come if we in the business world, or at least in some parts of the business world, know the value of lifelong inner growth and development, this vertical development dimension that is sort of different from the more horizontal learning dimension, that we need to learn new skills and facts, that is one thing, but the more vertical dimension how come that we have discovered this and the value of that in business, but that we are not at all talking about that in society? Again, in society today, we talk about lifelong learning, of course, that we might need in the middle of our careers to reskill and learn to program or something. But this inner development, maturity, wisdom journey, we are not at all talking about. And then in the same way, I had the opportunity to work with some very talented organizational consultants who pointed out the value of understanding corporate culture and how you might not be able to create a certain culture, but that it's certainly a very important part of the top management responsibility to create the right environment so that a good corporate culture could emerge. And then asking the same question, if we in business, or at least in some parts of the business, spend a lot of time and energy on corporate culture, how come that we are not at all in society today looking at societal culture in the same way? And more specifically, if we are to try to have a good multicultural society, that business and organizational consultants tells me very, very clearly is not something that just happens automatically. To be able to have a good multicultural organizational society, then you really have to focus on creating the right holding environment and facilitating such a culture. And then finally, might there be a connection between the inner maturity of the people in an organization and the type of the complexity and the depth of the culture that organization is able to hold? And if that is the case, which I strongly believe, isn't it the same case in society? And if that is the same case in society, what conclusions could we draw from that?
There's so many directions we could go from here, and so there's two things that are touching me here. One is, I'm curious if there was a particular moment of shift for you from your life in banking and real estate to what has emerged over the last 15, 20 years, if there was something that really catalyzed that as a specific moment or an experience. Maybe I'll leave it there for now, and then we'll see.
Yeah, I sometimes get that question, and I'm sorry I have to give a disappointing answer there. No, there was no specific moment. I have many friends. One project that we might touch upon later, our non-profit open source digital platform for personal inner growth and development, the 29K project, we are doing together with the Ekskäret Foundation in Stockholm, which is run by a young entrepreneur called Niklas Adalbert. And he often shares his moment of awakening during, when he was very young, during military service, and he was doing a personal development week with a UGL method, and he had sort of a more or less moment of awakening. I have had other friends, more sadly, who has woken up in the hospital when they are 55 with the first heart attack and starting to realize that they are not living their own lives. They are living the lives of their fathers or something like that, and having such a shocking experience with shaking them up, waking them up. I think my developmental journey has been much more slow and more normal. I think that what has helped me the most, certainly doing leadership development training, as I mentioned, but also just meeting the challenges of life, both private life, but also business life. And having started many organizations in different businesses, when you're out there meeting resistance from the world, and if you are open-minded, then hopefully there will be some learning and some development in that journey.
Mm.
I never tried psychedelics until I was past 55. I have done that now. I perhaps wish I would have done that earlier. That has been something that has helped me to open up and to connect with even deeper layers in myself than I've been able to do before. But it was not any substantial part didn't play any substantial part in my shift. That was long after I left the business world and doing what I'm doing today.
I really resonate with what you're saying, though, as far as the business, ironically, can be a path to spiritual awakening. You know, just the process of everything that you have to confront within yourself to bring something into the world, the challenges you have to deal with. I feel like in some way they can either shut you down and make you really hard-edged, or they can open you up and connect yourself more deeply to yourself, to the people you're working with. And it sounds like there's a bit of that process that occurred for you as far as through the journey of bringing all these projects to life, maybe discovering like a deeper humanity within people.
Yeah, perhaps. What I definitely think would have helped me would have been to have had earlier on in my life a language around this lifelong inner development journey. We don't, in our culture today, in our Western culture today, and in our upbringing and schooling and everything, we don't have a language for this. So I didn't really know about the possibility even of vertical development or maturation or wisdom growth until I met these leadership development consultants. And then I was in my, say, late 40s. But I got very, very interested, and I immediately started to reading a lot of psychology and developmental psychology, and trying to understand what is really going on within us in this lifelong development.
I think part of the language problem that you're talking about is being addressed with the inner development goals. What was the journey? Is that part of the vision for the inner development goals, to create a language?
Yeah,
common language?
Yes and no. What I was referring to when I was saying I was missing something, I wish that I, in my early 20s or something, or perhaps even earlier. I mean, even at secondary school, I studied. At secondary school we had psychology on the curriculum, philosophy and psychology, but there was no one even mentioning psychology, that we are on a lifelong, whatever word you don't want to use the word, or definitely not back then, consciousness development journey, but that you are on a wisdom journey, and that wisdom journey can be facilitated, and that you should expect to develop in this direction, and that this development sometimes could be painful, and that you shouldn't be afraid of pain, because it might be developmental pain, and then you should try to go through the pain to the other side, and that there might be something on the other side. Nobody told me that, and that story is not really what we are trying to address with the inner development goals. The inner development goals is something much more, to call it, simpler. It's really just a way of trying to find a language that can help put on the awareness of more people that we have the ability to develop a lot of inner skills and capabilities that could be very valuable to develop, both for us as individuals, for us functioning in organizations, but not the least for society, for democracy, and for the planet. So I strongly believe that one of the main reasons why not more are happening on the SDG side is that we are all feeling so overwhelmed by these daunting challenges that we very easily develop psychological defenses and just deny or rationalize or whatever. And to really be able to engage with these daunting challenges, we need to have enough psychological resources. So the IDGs is really about advocating for building psychological resources, putting inner development on the radar screen, and that has been working quite well. We have not gone so far to talk about consciousness development or wisdom journey or on those things. I hope that people who start to discover the inner development world through the inner development goals will rapidly move beyond the framework of the inner development goals and go into these very much more, I would say, interesting and rewarding aspects of lifelong development. But we are not that ambitious in this project. We're taking a first small step.
So in your inquiry, right, I love what you shared about the human journey, the wisdom journey, you know, the difficulty of that and the importance of it. And I think also the importance of making it a thing, you know, that's part of becoming a fully actualized, realized human being. What have you observed as far as how we can bring that into a certain societal, cultural normalcy?
Yeah, I think the first step is a little bit along the inner development goals. It's just using, let us call it the old paradigm, the paradigm of science and development, and to say that science clearly show that we have a lot of capacities, inner capacities, that we can develop. And for example, science clearly show that we are not born with a certain amount of compassion or empathy. Science clearly show that that can be developed. And I think that most people would agree that in this world, more capacity for empathy and compassion is needed. So the good news is that we can have science pointing at possibility of developing this. The bad news is, of course, that you cannot, with any of these inner skills and capacities, and certainly not with empathy, teach it in any normal meaning of the word teaching in a school setting or something. You need to have what some psychologists call immersive learning or transformative learning, accessing much more deeper layers of your psyche to do it. But that it is possible, and that there are programs that can facilitate that, that is absolutely clear. And it's the same for all the other capacities that we have identified within the inner development goals, both in the being dimension, in the thinking dimension, in the relating dimension, in the collaborating dimension, and also in the acting dimension. So that's sort of the starting point to bring the inner world again on the radar screen, and by hopefully being able to change the public discourse so that we are starting to talk about this and realizing the importance of this and the connection between the inner development, and that this is important not just for the individual, not just for the organization, but also for society. We are going to be able to deepen democracy, and eventually also for the planet.
So I'm hearing this intersection between what we just talked about, the wisdom journey, the human journey, and just the practical framework of the IDGs. And then you said that, you know, they're not, the goal of the IDGs isn't necessarily to, you know, create this awareness around the wisdom journey, but maybe what is the specific vision for the IDGs? Maybe we can start with that. What is the specific vision for the IDGs?
Yeah, very clearly, to bring awareness to the fact that if we are going to be able to solve our existential collective challenges, we cannot just look at the outside. We cannot just locate those problems and the solutions in the outer world. We also have to look inside. We also have to look inside ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get that message across, then that would be wonderful.
And what's the origin story? How did this project come to be?
No, it came as a communications project. How can we communicate these things? Because if you're using a language, even if you're just talking about consciousness development, most people shut down and are not following you any longer. So it was really to try to find a simple language, even perhaps a simplistic language that would resonate with normal people today, normal business people, journalists, even politicians today, and start to open up a curiosity in this direction. And it was really a joint effort between my foundation, the Ekskäret Foundation, and one initiative that, the one that I just mentioned earlier, the 29K, that's 29,000. That's the number of days you might have if you live a long life. And that's the name of our non-profit digital platform for personal growth and development. And between these two projects, and also speaking to many other people in the field, we really recognized that we had a problem in telling the story about why inner development is not just for the individual. Why inner development is actually something that we need to do, and we need to support for the benefit of society and for the planet. That was the communicative question. And then we teamed up with the communication agency in New York, who had been doing all the communication and identity program around the Sustainable Development Goals. And we said, can we do something similar? And by pure chance, the head of that, or the founder of that communication agency, is a Swede, Jakob Trollborg, and Jakob Trollbeck. He said, "Let's do this." So his agency is the third sort of founder of the initiative.
So I'm curious to unpack this journey of initiating something, because I know many of the people here are all working on their own projects, all have an aspiration to create some sort of social change or some kind of movement. And the IDGs have been a super successful movement. I mean, as far as I understand, it's growing rapidly. There's several hundred hubs, expected to be several hundred more by the end of the year. This is definitely a movement that's taken root. And so I have a couple of questions. Is one, as far as your role, like you founded the Ekskäret Foundation, and now that has become one of the key initiating parties in the inner development goals. What was your role in initiating and supporting the early formation of this project?
Part of the of formulating the question, formulating what needs to be done. And I mentioned earlier that one of the activities within the Ekskäret Foundation has for many years been invitational conferences, where we have gathered people in different fields out on the island for some immersive days. And for a number of years, we had gathered each year leading thinkers within developmental psychology, and really diving deep into the field of developmental psychology. And out from that came also a few public conferences in in Stockholm. One of them was called Growth That Matters, inner growth compared to outer growth, growth that matters. And I would say that it was in one of those conferences out on the island with, again, a lot of thinkers in this field. Bob Keegan from Harvard was there, Otto Scharmer was there, Peter Senge might have been there, a few people thinking about societal change and also deep knowledge about how we in Western science can approach this in a developmental journey, knowing very well, all of us, that Western science is just one way of approaching this and a fairly recent way of approaching this. Of course, this has been part of indigenous wisdom, religious traditions, spiritual traditions for thousands of years. But again, communicating it today, we think that it's good to also ground this in contemporary Western science. So it was really at one of those conferences where we really deeper started to think about how can we find a communications network. And then the name and the spark, that I have to give credit to my co-founder in 29K, Erik Fernholm, who came up with a spark, and then he meeting up with Jakob Trollbeck, that really sparked it. And then my foundation was holding this a little bit financially, not very much, and that for a very short period, and then it started to take off by itself. So if I was funding anything of this, it was more the work and the conferences leading up to this. Once the idea was there, then it fairly quickly gathered a entrepreneurial momentum of its own, very much thanks to that one of the board members of my foundation, Jan Artem Henriksson, who's been on the board of directors of my foundation almost from the start. He decided to take on this project and run as the CEO of the project. And it's very much thanks to his work that we've been able to attract funding and that the project is spreading the way it does.
What would you say are some of the key factors that have led to the success of the project? I mean, there's a lot of people doing all sorts of consciousness development work in the world, and I think the IDGs really stand out. It's been a very successful project, not just of a nonprofit, but something that feels like a genuine movement that's growing on. You have hundreds of hubs and people creating their own self-organized hubs all around the world. Like what if you had to point to any particular factors there?
Yes. And then I will point to something that is a strength in this respect, but that is also a weakness. But first of all, I must say that the time was more than ripe for something like this. The Western culture has been rapidly shifting, as I'm sure all of you have noticed during at least the last 5 years. The things are possible to do today that was not at all possible 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the IDGs wouldn't have worked, and now our IDGs feels a little bit like we were 5 years too late. We could have been a little bit earlier, but nobody else did something there.
Why do you say that part about that it wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago? Just to open that a little bit. Why do you say that?
Because speaking in consciousness terms, there has been a big opening up in the collective consciousness of the Western civilization. If we stop there, which is the only part I can have anything to say about. So, but at least then in the Western civilization, there has been an opening up in consciousness, so that exactly what we are talking about today, this relationship between personal inner growth and development and societal change, and the fact that we actually can talk about inner development, and that we might also be able to talk about cultural development, not in an old modernistic way, not in a colonializing way, but in a way that integrates all the postmodern critique of the modernistic project, but still moves beyond that. So to be able to talk about these things and feel resonance around these things, I would say when I started my foundation 10 years ago, and still 5 years ago, there was just a fraction of a percent of even amongst intellectuals in Stockholm or London, for that matter, those cities where I moved the most, where this would resonate. So that might have been 0.1% or whatever I should say, or even less. Whereas today, I'm sure you all notice that there is a resonance. I mean, still not in any way a majority of the population, or even a large part, but what would I guess today? Perhaps 2% in Stockholm would resonate with this, and that sounds
really
very
that low?
that sounds very little. But then, of course, if you say 2% in Sweden, Sweden is a small country, 10 million people. That is 200,000 people in Sweden. And of those, 50,000 would probably be in Greater Stockholm area. And 50,000 people, I mean, that's a good starting point for a movement. And I'm sure that there's, I mean, not giving any certain percentage, but the fact that this has really shifted, and that a large part of intellectuals are today sort of feeling a resonance and understanding that this might be something that could be interesting to look deeper into. That is something that has happened during the last 5 years. I mean, Brexit, Erdogan, Trump, storming of the Capitol, the
COVID.
the whole of COVID, the war of aggression in Europe, all of this are completely shaking us. And of course, again, bringing out a lot of defense and anger and fear, but also opening up and making at least some of us all more curious and more open to deep societal change. And just as a parenthesis, I certainly believe that we are right at the beginning of a very, very deep societal shift, and that this societal shift could go either way. Most signs are pointing towards a breakdown of the Western civilization, a fragmentation, a new dark age. But there are also signs pointing at the possibility of a breakthrough rather than a breakdown. And I believe that if we are going to have a breakthrough, it's certainly going to be an emergent process, meaning that we do not know what it will look like and that we can certainly not manage it or plan for it. But I think that there are things that we can do that can support an emergent process and increase the odds of a breakthrough rather than a breakdown. And one of the most important things we can do there is to help ourselves to be able to relate to ourselves, to each other, to society, and to the planet in deeper ways. And that is another way of saying consciousness development. So if we can help with consciousness development and at least bring a small part of the population up to the next level of consciousness development, that for me would be my best contribution to a breakthrough rather than a breakdown.
And just to circle back to, the conversation about the IDGs and the expansion. So you talked about the time is right for it, what other factors would you point to that?
Yes,
that might...
sorry. Thank you for getting me back on track there. Yeah, so the major reason for why this is resonating right now is the timing. It's the timing. It's culture, the Western culture, but is part of it is ready for this now and has been ready for this for a couple of years, really waiting for it. A common language, something to be a framework to gather around and to start talking about. So that is one thing. The other thing is that it is deliberately a fairly naked framework. And that is both a strength and a weakness. The strength is that you can come to this framework from very, very different angles, beliefs, approaches. You can come from a spiritual angle, you can come from an organizational development angle, you can come from a psychological angle, you can come from a business angle, and use the framework. And by being so naked, it benefits from, well, compared to many other developmental frameworks that are out there, has been out there, some for thousands of years, as I mentioned before, they very often have strong connotations in one of these directions. They could be too much spiritual, can come from a spiritual tradition, or they could be too corporate or too whatever. So by being naked, many people can gather around it. That's the strength of being a naked framework. The drawback, of course, is that it is not enough on itself to meaningfully move individuals or society. You on top of that, on top of this, you need values and facts and perspectives and other things. So it's a good common denominator. I think you could even say that it is a necessary factor to bring about this shift, but it's not sufficient. The inner development goals framework cannot stand on its own. It has to be contextualized in different contexts.
I think, at least from my vantage point, one of the biggest values that it offers is a language for accessing a group of people, specifically at the higher levels of traditional corporate organizational leadership, accessing people who might otherwise not be into something like conscious development or presence or whatever, and giving them what feels like a rigorous scientific framework and languaging that they can use without appearing to be too much in the alternative camp.
No, yes, and also trying to be also politically, and by being naked, we are also politically, hopefully, neutral and not captured. You could come to the inner development, and most, I would say, of course, come to this from a progressive perspective, but you do not necessarily need to come from a progressive perspective. You could come from a more conservative perspective, again, talking about things like character development and virtue development, and using that sort of language for essentially the same thing.
I love that framing, because even in its neutrality, it can be considered political in the sense of being, liberal or progressive. I appreciate that context, and how also seeing how it can be framed in, maybe a more conservative context.
And of course, my personal belief is, but that's just my belief, is of course that with personal development, with that expansion of capacity and perspective taking, in connecting with your inner compass, in expanding your capacity, but also your reach for empathy and all of that, then naturally you come to it. It's very difficult to be a nationalist or a racist, having gone through that development. So of course there is a I'm looking for the right words. It's personal development is liberating in a responsible way. It gives you freedom, it gives you liberty, but it also increases your own felt responsibility. And by that, naturally, I hope that feeling responsible for society, for future generations, and for the planet comes naturally with personal development.
And I think specifically vertical development tends to be unitive rather than separative, and to what extent any political orientation falls in one category or another. You can probably be conservative or progressive and be in that camp from a unitive orientation, and you could probably be in both, left leaning, right leaning, and be there in a very separative orientation. So I think there's a lot of political orientation doesn't necessarily indicate vertical development.
So
yeah, I want to,
totally agree.
I love to keep things like super practical and kind of drilling down. And I wonder if I can get your observations on the early stages of the movement. What was it like in, when it was back of the envelope kind of idea stage to maybe the first phase of that project for you, and for you as a supporter and initiator, what were your observations about that early journey with the inner development goals?
No, I mean,
like, how did you get your first 1,000 people?
No, one of my strengths, if I may use that word, and one of the things I'm bringing to the table in what I'm doing is really my entrepreneurial experience. So I have perhaps started something like 20 business companies, and now in the non-profit or now societal, and as a societal entrepreneur, I might have started 20 initiatives there as well. Again, some small and unsuccessful, and some more successful. And my conclusion is very much that it is usually the same pattern. It is the same pattern. Then sometimes the projects or businesses resonates very well with the environment, and then it takes off fairly quickly. Sometimes it doesn't resonate so well, and you have to pivot and you have to change, and then you might find a bit more match, and it will be a small project. And in some cases, it won't work. It might have been a bad idea from the start, or it might have been a brilliant idea, but you're 2 years too early or 2 years too late, and it doesn't work. So for me, entrepreneurship, business or social, is very much about having the right idea, certainly, but getting the timing right, getting the right people involved, and then, to use a terminology from Otto Scharmer, really trying to feel into the future, feel into the field. And I think his wording is leading from the emerging future. And that sounds very strange, of course, but I believe that you can actually do that. You can feel into what is going on and try to lead a little bit from the future, and then you need luck, timing and luck.
So you said, since you've been doing Ekskäret, you've maybe initiated 20 projects. What's the difference between initiating and founding?
I don't know if there is a specific difference. It's a gray scale. I think I would use myself saying that I founded the Ekskäret Foundation. I certainly founded the 29K project. I founded Perspectiva in London together with Jonathan Rowson. And if you found it, you might put in some money and effort. You are on the board of directors. You might even be the first managing director operating it. You are very hands-on in getting it off the ground. Initiating might more be one step behind. You might be cultivating a field, bringing the right people together, telling someone that you should perhaps work with that person. Here is something where you can do. I might provide a little bit of seed funding, see what you can do. That's more initiating.
Mm-hmm. I think my last question, and then we'll go into triads. One of the things that comes out for me through how you describe the early days of the IDGs is the people that you brought together through your learning labs. I mean, this sounds like part of the mandate with
and came together. I mean, I shouldn't. I mean, as in business, as in social entrepreneurship, it's usually these processes are very emergent. So it's not that you sit in a room, do a plan, these are the persons, bring them together, bam, bam. People meet, people talk, things happen, things emerge. Yeah, it's a very organic process. But certainly I can take credit for actively trying to, in many situations, create space for such a process and holding that space.
And maybe you can just share a few words about that. At least for me as an outsider, it seems like a gift that you have to bring, the right people together in a space. And I wonder if you have some thoughts about, I mean, maybe you could just say it's just emergent and it happens, but I wonder as far as your role in that and your maybe skillfulness and everything you've learned in that journey of bringing together the right people in the right space. What are some like
okay, and here yes, and here I might. This is not the language I would have used 10 years ago, and certainly I was completely unaware of this when I started in business. But I think I have some ability to connect with what is going on, and also to connect with on a good day, and I can't say that I'm constantly in connection with this, but on a good day, especially in nature and in silence, I might be able to connect with something that could be called the evolutionary pulse of the universe, feeling that something is moving and feeling into what is happening right now. And I think that I used that to start a few businesses by being receptive to this and seeing patterns, perhaps half a year or 2 years earlier than most people would do. And I would say that's some sort of receptiveness or perception that I have. I'm open in that dimension. I'm very closed in other dimensions, especially to myself and also in relation with other people. I'm not as open there, and there is where psychedelics has lately again helped me to open up. But this openness to what is going on and the evolutionary process, I think I've had that since I was a child, even if I was not aware of that. And I think that is what I'm trying to cultivate and what I'm trying to use. And I recognize a little bit that again in the language of Otto Scharmer, leading from the emerging future, leaning into and feeling into what is emerging, without again in any way believing that you can predict or control or anything, but really just be part of that emergence, be the emergence in some way.
Beautiful. Thank you,
you.
Thomas, for
Thank you.
the wisdom and the deep reflection. So we're going to take a moment now to invite our audience into triads. And Natasha, maybe you can unspotlight me and Thomas. And so this is an invitation for you to connect with a couple of other people in the space here to share anything that's emerging for you, any questions you might have, any insights, any reflections. And then we'll come back and invite the audience to share anything they feel called to share, or ask Thomas some questions if you'd like to. All right, so Natasha, how much time will we have?
We'll have 9 minutes.
9? I think that's
6
maybe a little
minutes?
less. Yeah,
Sorry,
6
Lorenz.
minutes. Let's keep it simple.
Yeah, so you'll just have 6 minutes, and we really feel like this is the best part, because this is really where you get to connect with others and share some of the ideas that are emerging for you and resonating for you, or some of the questions you're still left with. And then when we come back, we'll invite you into the larger group sharing process with questions or reflections as well. So I hope that you'll stay on and connect with somebody in the space, and we'll see you back here in 7 short minutes. Enjoy. Second. All right. All right.
Welcome back, everybody. And we would love to open up our space for any questions, reflections, any questions you'd like to ask Thomas, anything you'd like to share in this space. If you'd like to speak, please click on the reactions button and raise your hand. Would anyone like to speak? Donna, go ahead.
Good morning. Did I start my video? Here it is.
There you are.
Thank you. Hi, Lorenz. I already
Hi.
gave Sasha an energetic hug. So one for you too. I sure miss you all. Tomas, I just want to come to Sweden and live with you and do this work. I've been doing this work since I was in 1966. Like, I came into this world doing this work. And as a child, I felt so shut down and so contained by the adults around me that didn't understand the language I was bringing. So I'm finally feeling like I'm not insane. And that the language that I have always spoken is now an emerging language that's coming. So I'm not feeling like, damn, how come we didn't do it like in 1966? I recognize that we could not have done it any sooner. I recognize that the 50 years I've been on this planet, little bugs. I recognize the 50 years I've been on this planet was the end of an era, and that we have moved into a new era. And so I'm enheartened. Is that a word? I'm heartened. I'm excited. I'm excited to work with the youth, because what I have brought to them is like, hey, you have been closer to God or the universe or whatever you want to call it longer than I have. And I have been on this planet with experiential wisdom. I have an experiential wisdom. You have a cosmic wisdom. Let's bring them together and get it on, because I've been here long enough and I'm sick of it. I'm tired of the debauchery, and I don't know how other people don't see it. However, I'm working with the Charter for Compassion International, and I have seen that I have seen the movement of compassion, especially within the Charter for Compassion, expanding into an applicable compassion. And so I don't know if there's a question there. Just thank you for doing the work that you're doing, because it helps me feel like not leaving the planet. I mean, truly, I didn't know how to stay on the planet anymore. And between other people doing this similar work in psychedelics, I figured out how to save my life. So yeah, here it goes. It is the time now. So looking for the whys of why we haven't done this before, it just wasn't time, but now's the time. So let's get it on. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Thank you for those reflections.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, great to see you too, Donna. And Brigitta, did I say your name right?
Yeah, thank you, Lorenz. Thank you for the inspiration, both of you, Thomas. My question is, how do we get out of our bubble? Because I still feel that we are the privileged ones to have those thoughts. And I have been visiting Otto and Peter in Boston, and I'm a privileged person. How do we really get out of our bubble and bring in all the others on board? Maybe farmers. I'm living in a rural area here, and I'm asking myself, what kind of language do we need to develop to get others on board of this, to really translate that and not even use maybe the language we use? So maybe you have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
No, no other thoughts than that I think we have to be a bit patient, and at the same time we need to work on this systematically, but we can't expect cultural shift to happen overnight. I'm already surprised that this cultural shift is now going as fast as it is. I think it's going exponentially. We are still at the very start of this curve, but again, going from a fraction of a promille to perhaps a couple of percent, that is already a huge development. So let's see what's happening, what will happen during the next 10 years, and how we can all support this process, at the same time being aware of the fact, but not panicking, that there are so many forces working in the opposite direction, and that in many respects the time is short. But I also think that it would be a mistake to fall into the sort of modernistic trap of saying that we only have 5 years, we only have 10 years, now we really need to act, we need an action plan, I think that perspective is also what is limiting the progress of this. We need to find a way of actively leaning into the process, knowing that it is urgent, but not panicking and falling into old patterns of management and control. Easier said than done.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Brigitte, for the question. And Alain.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas. I've been working with Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer for a long time, and I sense that what Otto says about being able to cultivate a space where the emerging future can come in. I'm currently working mostly with elders, helping elders, including myself, adopt more regenerative worldviews. And I'm wondering, what is your experience of generational work, in the sense that how can elders particularly contribute more than they have been, either isolating themselves or being ostracized, being isolated, to what is happening in society at this time?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking. I would also tie this a little bit to being curious about indigenous cultures and things like that. So I'm very curious in that direction. We have a few times gathered indigenous elders at the Ekskäret Island and tried to learn and to exchange. So I have a huge curiosity in that direction. Also being very aware of that we should not be naive. There is a lot we can learn from these wisdom traditions, but we should also know that they flourished in a very different world from what we have today, and we should be aware of that, of course. Going to the question of elders, and particularly elders in our own society, we have during the last 5 years at Ekskäret Island been cultivating our own group of elders that are sort of that have the that are official custodians of the island, and making sure that the connection between nature and previous generations, elders, are brought on to the upcoming generations, both those that are adult today, but also the young and children. So that is a group. It's not a very big group. It's a group of between 10 and 20 people, but we try to have 2 elders present on the island at almost every event that we are doing. And we find that holding of the space and transfer of wisdom has been very, very important. And surprisingly, perhaps, we have found that the biggest resonance has been between the elders and the activities directed to an age group between, say, 25 to 35. Because they are old enough to really appreciate and realize that in today's society, the connection between the generations are missing. If we are looking at a little bit younger, then they are perhaps not appreciating and understanding why. And if we're looking at a little bit older, the ones 45 to 55 might be too close to the 70, 80-year-old elders. But 25 to 35, perfect match, working super, super.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
I just I want to talk about.
Hello, Michael. I just want to acknowledge that Michael is an old friend of mine.
Yeah, nice to see you, Tomas, and everyone else here. Yeah, I love the conversation about the elders as well, and the wisdom bearers. And there's something I mentioned in the talk I shared in the chat before. I talked with Fredrik about the IGGs about that, but also talked about the identity we need. So what is it to become like what you say, a steward and elder, this identity shift? And today we see ourselves as our work role and maybe a friend or a parent or something like that, but we don't see ourselves as custodians or stewards of the planet or crew members of the planet, as Bucky said, and things like that. And that's the thing I want to explore more. How do we begin from the identity, and then everything else comes naturally from an identity? That's what I've been exploring with myself. And once I found my identity as Captain Future, everything else was clear what I had to do with my life. And that's something maybe we can explore, especially with younger people that are fascinated with identities and computer games and role playing and all that. So that you can easily take that route with people to start with an identity of becoming a caretaker of the planet and then go from there. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Michael. And Rick?
Yeah, Thomas, I appreciated all the advanced notifications that were sent out by Lorenz, and I started doing a deep dive. It's always great to discover somebody you never knew before. So that's a gem for me. The question that I'm curious to know a little bit more about, you alluded to it, but you didn't say too much about it. But you said that basically the inner development goals are sort of like a foundational heuristic to begin a process, but isn't enough. And I'm just wondering, from a Nordic perspective, what are the sort of latest trends in development to cultivate? How to get beyond the 2% that you described earlier? If you're an inflection point on the exponential curve, you don't know when the 4% is going to come next. So, what hope or aspirations do you have to be able to accelerate? And what are the specific methods that are acceptable to Swedes?
And of course, this is a question that we have been sitting a bit with. cultural developments so far in the history of humanity have mostly, at least, happened geographically. Different areas developed differently. Something happened in a country, you had a cultural shift or something. And of course, the Scandinavian countries have in many ways got an advanced culture. And that might be thanks to, and we didn't touch upon this, but my Danish friend and colleague Lena Anderson and we had a research project which ended up with Lena spending a lot of time writing the book, The Nordic Secret, explaining how a very important part of the cultural shift from being the poorest, non-democratic agrarian societies in Europe, where at the end of the 1800s, people were starving and a large part of the population were emigrating, mainly to the US. And then just a few generations later, even before the Second World War, we were all amongst the happiest, the most stable industrial democracies in the world. And that one important factor and often forgotten factor was that there was, at the end of the 1800s, in all these Nordic countries, an later on institutionalized program for consciousness development amongst the population. And this was because we had some very visionary politicians and intellectuals back then who understood, because they had read the German idealist philosophers like Schiller, Goethe, Herder, von Humboldt, Hegel, that our mind is not a rational machine. Our mind is an organic system under lifelong development, and that consciousness development can and should be supported, not just for the benefit of the individual, but for the benefit of society. So what happened in these Scandinavian countries was that 100 years ago, a lot of small centers out in nature were created with the explicit aim of inviting young people in their early 20s for 6 months in retreat to learn new things, but certainly also work on their consciousness development, and more specifically, taking this very important developmental step from moving from a socialized mind into a more self-authoring mind, connecting with your inner compass. And the theory was that if you should be able to help and navigate this societal transition and to become conscious co-creators of the new modernity that was coming along in the cultural shift, then you cannot just be in a socialized mind depending on an external authority for direction. You need to connect with your inner compass and become a conscious co-creator of this, what is being born. And I think that is exactly where we are today again, but now on a global scale. We are at a global shift. And then coming back to your question, will this shift, will there be some regions that will be leading? Could that be the Nordic countries? Could it be New Zealand? Could it be Canada? Could it be other places leading? Or will it more be a digital, a global awakening, but not geographically, that we will, just like we are doing today, we will find each other online. And it doesn't matter if we are calling in today from Hawaii or Toronto or South Africa, we are finding each other and something is happening online. So yeah, it could perhaps be both, but I'm hoping for a strong online and global component of this awakening, and exactly what we are doing today is of course an important part of that.
Thank you, Thomas. Thomas, quick time check. Do we have 2 more questions? Do you have a couple of extra minutes if we go over?
I have a few extra minutes, but not more than 5.
Okay, great. So we'll do these last 2 questions and then we'll wrap up. Klaus, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Thomas, for a very interesting conversation. I asked myself exactly the same question, where to start with awareness-based system change. So we heard one view, it could become from the older generation, they have enough time, but maybe in future not that much power. I'm leading an IDG hub in Cologne here in Germany since 1 year, since we started with all the activities. And I have to say, this hub is growing rapidly and specifically with young people. I would say it's the typical Generation Z. And I had an event at the University of Cologne last week. And what I really recognized is the people are very much aware of the SDGs and very less, but they question a lot how to get there. And I would say awareness-based system change and the SDGs and the IDGs need to get together. And that is, I think we need to really link them to just say, how do we enable change via skills? And I think that is what we try to really build, a connection between the SDGs and the IDGs and the connectiveness via the skills. So my question to you is, as I really find it's a good starting point to start maybe with universities, with young people who are hungry for knowledge, who are really willing to get something changed. Do we plan something specifically for higher education, for universities, in terms of material, in terms of curriculum, or whatever, what we could use?
I think that would be very useful. I don't think that we have the resources today within the IDG project to do that. I don't even know if we should do that, but perhaps what we could do would be to initiate a project and try to find some funding to do this, because I think that this is something that is missing.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And one last question from Natalia.
Hello, I'll try to be brief. I had posted a question in the chat. It's regarding the levels of consciousness. David Hawkins wrote years ago about transcending levels of consciousness and felt that individual levels of consciousness did more, or raising individual levels of consciousness did more than our social activism attempts to drag people along the enlightenment path, to change, more people in society, etc. And it strikes me, and as my question at the time was, what about focusing on raising the levels of consciousness of those in the positions of power and wealth amongst our leaders and industrial leaders, etc. And you just mentioned the Nordic secret, which seems to me as though when politicians are able to get together and they're focused on enlightened ideas, they can make great change at the same time. And so if we're in a position of, if we're rushed to save the planet, to move towards greater consciousness, is this a viable option to focus on those people who are in power?
Yeah, that would be great if we could do that. But consciousness development is it's difficult, and you can't administer it from the outside. It has to happen from the inside, and it's an organic process, and it can take a long time. And my personal experience is that it is easier to stimulate and facilitate from the outside in the early parts of your life, in youth and in young adulthood, especially as some have already pointed out, the Gen Z, people today, perhaps between 20 and 30, are super open to this in a way that my generation certainly was not. Unfortunately, once you become a little bit older and established in your way and your thinking, then usually something quite upshaking is necessary for this to happen. It could be, as I said earlier, a personal setback. It could be a complicated divorce, a bankruptcy. It could be your retirement. It could be sickness or something like that makes you wake up. Or it could be a psychedelic experience. But apart from that, I do not have a good recipe on how to bring an awakening up in the powerful elite. Even if I had 40 of them at my disposal for a whole week, I do not really know any method that I would with certainty be able to facilitate a shift in a single one of them if I'm not lucky.
There's always divine intervention.
Yeah. Hope for divine intervention. Yes. But having said that, I mean, if you just give it time, I shouldn't be too pessimistic. I'm also seeing, I mean, in business elite, politicians, there is also a natural awakening. I mean, even if it's still very, very small, and unfortunately, and a later awakening in those positions usually lead to those people exiting industry or exiting politics and realizing they want to do something completely different.
Thomas, last question for you. Is there anything in the world that's really giving you hope in this moment?
Yes, and that is that there is this small but rapidly spreading global awakening, of which this call is an important part. We just need to make sure that we bring all our efforts into having lots of meaningful meetings and exchanges like this on a global basis, and hopefully speed up the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas. And we always like to end our calls with a quick resonance check in the chat. Maybe just take a moment, 1 or 2 words. How are you leaving the conversation today? And thank you all so much for joining us and participating in this discussion. And Thomas, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us. Just really this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah. And thank you for organizing. Thank you for organizing.
Thank you so much, Thomas and Lorenz. And I see some beautiful words in the chat: inspired, full-hearted, happy, energized, and hopeful. Lots of inspiration, thoughtfulness, powerful. Hope is alive. Lots of gratitude. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah, go ahead and unmute and say goodbye on your way out. Thank you all for
time is
joining.
now.
Time is now.
And we are the ones. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aloha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.